Tribunal, please. The persons who held these posts in the ordinary cabinet varied between the years 1933 and 1945. Although it is not incumbent upon us to prove who they were, since the group and not the individuals are under consideration, nevertheless, their names are already before this tribunal in the original governmental chart, USA Exhibit 3. Since it will be of interest to the tribunal to see what persons, and 17 of them are defendants here, held what positions in the cabinet, a table has been prepared which lists all of the departments and posts I have mentioned and the incumbents thereof during the years 1933 to 1945. The German equivalents of the titles are also shown, and with the permission of the tribunal, I will now distribute this table to the members of the tribunal, which is what is being handed to your honors now. Copies have likewise been filed in the Defendant's Information Center. The table also is annotated with citations to sources verifying the facts shown, all of which, however, were of common knowledge during the period in question. Diverting from the text, this is simply prepared for the convenience of the tribunal in connection with studying the briefs and the documents. As I said at the outset, that the proof will show that there was only an artificial distinction between the ordinary cabinet, the secret cabinet council, and the Council of Ministers for the Defense of the Reich. This is evidenced in the first instance by the unity of personnel between the three subdivisions. Thus, on 4 February 1938, Hitler created the secret cabinet council. And if your honors will refer to this big chart, you'll notice under 1938, there's a red line pointing down to the secret cabinet council created during that year. This decree appears in 1938 Reich's Gazetterblatt, Part 1 at page 112. It is in our document book in document 2031 PS. 2031 PS, and I should like to quote from this document. It begins with the opening paragraph, document 2031 PS.
It's in Book X, is it?
Yes, sir. 2031.
2031?
Yes.
Yes, right at the end. They've got the noise right at the end.
I beg your pardon, it's under the Laws and Decrees
Yes.
section.
Yes, it's right at the end.
Yes. I see.
I quote, "To advise me in conducting the foreign policy, I am setting up a secret cabinet council. As president of the secret cabinet council, I nominate Reich Minister von Neurath. As members of the secret cabinet council, I nominate Reich Minister of the Exterior, Ribbentrop, Prussian Prime Minister, Reich Minister of the Air, Supreme Commander of the Air Forces, General Field Marshal Hermann Goering. The Führer's Deputy, Reich Minister Rudolf Hess, Reich Minister for the Enlightenment of the People and of Propaganda, Dr. Joseph Goebbels, Reich Minister and Chief of the Reich Chancellery, Dr. Lammers." That's shown at the top immediately under Hitler. The Supreme Commander of the Army, General von Brauchitsch. The Supreme Commander of the Navy, Grand Admiral Dr. Honorary Raeder. The Chief of the Supreme Command of the Armed Forces, Lieutenant General Wilhelm Keitel. it will be noted that every member was either a Reich minister or, as in the case of the Army, Navy, and OKW heads, had the rank and authority of a Reich minister. On 30 August 1939, Hitler established the Council of Ministers for the Defense of the Reich, or better known as the Ministerial Council, coming down from the year 1939, Ministerial Defense Council. This was the so-called War Cabinet. The decree appears in 1939, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 1539. And I now refer to document 2018 PS of the Laws and Decrees, 2018 PS, and I quote paragraph numbered 1. A ministerial council for Reich defense shall be established as a standing committee out of the Reich Defense Council. The standing members of the Ministerial Council for Reich Defense shall include General Field Marshal Goering as chairman, Führer's deputy, the defendant Hess, Commissioner General for Reich Administration, who is defendant Frick, Commissioner General for Economy, the defendant Funk, Reich Minister in Chief of the Reich Chancellery, who was Dr. Lammers, Chief of the High Command for the Armed Forces, who was the defendant Keitel. The chairman may draw on any other members of the Reich Defense Council, including further personalities, for advice, unquote. Again, it will be seen that all were also members of the ordinary cabinet. But this use of the cabinet as a manpower reservoir from whom the trusted collaborators were selected becomes particularly poignant when we consider the actions of the Nazi conspirators, which were not published in the Reichsgesetzblatt, which were concealed from the world, and which were part and parcel of their conspiracy to wage aggressive war. It will have been noted that the decree setting up the Ministerial Council contained this language, the one to which I have just referred. A Ministerial Council for Reich Defense shall be established as a standing committee out of the Reich Defense Council. And also subparagraph 3 of the same one. The chairman may draw on any other members. I've already read that. Pardon. There is evidence already before the tribunal establishing the creation by the cabinet on the 4th of April 1933 of this really secret war planning body. I refer the tribunal to USA Exhibit 24, which appears in our document book as document 2261 PS. That document contains the unpublished Reich Defense Law of 21 May 1935. As to the membership of that council when first created, I have here a copy of the second session of the Working Committee of the Delegates for the Reich Defense, dated the 22nd of May, 1933, and signed by the defendant Keitel. It appears in our document book as EC 177. EC 177. U.S. Exhibit 390. The composition of the Reich Defense Council appears on page 3 of the original and also on page 3 of the translation.
I thought you were going to refer to 2261 PS.
Your Honor, please, I just referred to it as being an exhibit already in evidence and that it was one of the unpublished Reich defense laws. That is the only purpose in referring to it.
All right. Now you're referring to EC 177, is that
Yes,
right?
sir.
Where is it?
EC 177 of this document book X. It's just this side of the laws and decrees, if Your Honor please. EC 177.
Yeah, I've got it.
And the quotation is from page 3 of the translation, beginning at the top of the page. Composition of the Reich Council. President, Reich Chancellor, Deputy, Reichswehr Minister, permanent members, Minister of the Reichswehr, Foreign Affairs, Interior, Finance, Economic Affairs, Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, Air, Chief of the Army Command Staff, Chief of the Navy Command Staff. Depending on the case, the remaining members, other personalities, for example, leading industrialists, etc., unquote. All but the chiefs of the Army and Navy Command Staff were then component parts of the ordinary cabinet. The composition of this Defense Council was changed in 1938. I refer the tribunal to USA Exhibit number 36, which appears in our document book as number 2194 PS. I believe that's under the laws and decrees. It's this side of the laws and decrees, number 2194. This contains the unpublished Reich defense law of 4th of September 1938. I now quote from paragraph 10, entitled The Reich Defense Council, which is found originally at page 4 of the copy of the law in the original, and I now quote from page 6 of the English translation, at the top of the page. Quoting, the leader and Reich Chancellor is chairman in the RVR. His permanent deputy is General Field Marshal Goering. He has the right to call conferences of the RVR. Permanent members of the RVR are the Reich Minister of Air and Supreme Commander of the Air Force, the Supreme Commander of the Army, the Supreme Commander of the Navy, the Chief of the OKW, the Deputy of the Leader, the Reich Minister and Chief of the Reich Chancellery, the President of the Secret Cabinet Council, the Chief Plenipotentiary for the Reich Administration, the Chief Plenipotentiary for Economics, the Reich Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Reich Minister of the Interior, the Reich Finance Minister, the Reich Minister for Popular Enlightenment and Propaganda, the President of the Reich Bank Directorate. The other Reich ministers and the Reich officers directly subordinate to the leader and the Reich Chancellor are consulted if necessary. Further personalities can be called as the case demands.
Colonel Storey,
Yes?
it would help me if you explained to me what conclusion you're asking us to draw from these documents.
Your Honor, please, we were trying to show the progressive domination of the Reich cabinet by the defendants and the members of this group, so that, as Your Honors will see as we later go ahead, that they could pass laws and decrees secretly by circulatory process or at the will, in effect, of the defendants. I realize it's a little detailed, but we're trying to show the composition and how it was set up, and the conclusions will be drawn later. By that time, the supreme commanders of the Army and Navy had been given ministerial rank and authorized to participate in cabinet meetings. I cite 1938 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 215. May we at this time call the attention of the tribunal to two members of the Defense Council who will also appear in the Ministerial Council under the same title, the Plenipotentiary for Administration and the Plenipotentiary for Economy. The former post was held by the defendant Frick, while the latter was first held by the defendant Schock and then by the defendant Funk, who signed the decree in that capacity. These facts are verified by the defendant Frick on USA Exhibit 3, which is the Nazi governmental organizational chart previously referred to. As we will later show, these two posts had many of the other ministries subordinated to them for war planning aims and purposes. They, together with the chief of the OKW, formed a powerful triumvirate known as the three-man college. That is shown in the three boxes down from 1935 to 1938, which figured prominently, as the proof will disclose, in the plans and preparations to wage aggressive war. And the incumbent of these positions were cabinet members, the defendants Frick, Funk, and Keitel. This utilization of the ordinary cabinet as a supply center for other governmental agencies and the cohesion between all of the groups is perhaps quickly seen on the chart which is shown. The points I have been making are illustrated on the chart. We are not offering this chart in evidence, although all facts thereon have already or will be proven. The chart is also designed to depict, to the left of the line running down the right center, thus in the main box entitled Reich Cabinet, which appears directly under Hitler, certain dates appear. And I believe I'll skip the part that describes those lines because it's self-evident. The Ministerial Defense Council was created in 1944. The delegate for total war effort was Goebbels. These agencies were, next to Hitler, important Nazi functionaries. In every case, as the chart shows, they were occupied by personnel taken from the ordinary cabinet. The arrow running from the Reich Defense Council to the Ministerial Defense Council is intended to reflect the fact shown previously that the latter was formed out of the former. We will, for other points of this presentation, refer again to the chart, especially to that portion to the right which relates to ministries. The unity, cohesion, and interrelationship of the subdivisions of the Reichsregierung was not the result of a commixture of personnel alone. It was also realized by the method in which it operated. The ordinary cabinet consulted together both by meetings and through the so-called circulation procedure. Under this procedure, which was predominantly used when meetings were not held, drafts of laws prepared in the individual ministries were distributed to the other cabinet members for approval or disapproval. The man primarily responsible for the circulation of drafts of laws under this procedure was Dr. Lammers, the leader and chief of the Reich Chancellery. I have here an affidavit executed by him concerning that technical device which we offer in evidence as USA Exhibit 391, Document 2999PS. Give me the translation. and it's short, and I'd like to quote it all. Document 2999 PS. I, Hans Heinrich Lammers, being first duly sworn, depose and say, I was leader of the Reich Chancellery from 30 January 1933 until the end of the war. In this capacity, I circulated drafts of proposed laws and decrees submitted to me by the minister who had drafted the law or decree to all members of the Reich Cabinet. A period of time was allowed for objections, after which the law was considered as being accepted by the various members of the Cabinet. This procedure continued throughout the whole war. It was followed also in the Council of Ministers for the Defense of the Reich, signed by Dr. Lammers and sworn to before Colonel Hinkle. As an illustration of how the circulation procedure worked, I have here a memorandum dated 9 August 1943, which bears the facsimile signature of the defendant Frick and is addressed to the Reich Minister and Chief of the Reich Chancellery. Attached to the memorandum is a draft of the law in question and a carbon copy of a letter dated December 22, 1943, from the defendant Rosenberg to the Reich Minister of the Interior, containing his comments in the draft. And I now offer document 1701 PS, USA Exhibit 392. And I call Your Honor's attention to the big red border around the enclosure. The quoted portion is from page 1 of the translation and page 1 of the original. Quoting, to the Reich Minister and Chief of the Reich Chancellery in Berlin, W8, for the information of the other Reich Ministers, subject, law on the treatment of the enemies of the society, in addition to my letter 19 March 1942. Enclosures 55. After the draft of the law on the treatment of enemies of the society has been completely rewritten, I am sending the enclosed new draft with the consent of the Reich Minister of Justice, Dr. Thirak, and ask that the law be approved in a circulatory manner. The necessary number of prints is attached, unquote. The same procedure was followed in the Council of Ministers when that body was created, and the decrees of the Council of Ministers were also circulated to the members of the ordinary cabinet. I have here a carbon copy of a memorandum found in the files of the Reich Chancellery by the Allied armies and addressed to the members of the Council of Ministers dated 17 September 1939, bearing the type signature of Dr. Lammers. It's document 1141 PS, U.S. Exhibit 393, 1141 PS. From the English translation, the copy is the last paragraph just above Dr. Lammers' signature, and I quote, matters submitted to the Council of Ministers for the Reich defense have heretofore been distributed only to the members of the Council. I have been requested by some of the Reich ministers, who are not permanent members of the Council, to inform them of the drafts of the decrees which are being submitted to the Council, so as to enable them to check those drafts from the point of view of their respective offices. I shall follow this request so that all of the Reich ministers will in the future be informed of the drafts of decrees which are to be acted upon by the Council for the Reich defense. I therefore request to add 45 additional copies of the drafts, as well as the letters which usually contain the arguments for the drafts, to the folders submitted to the Council." Unquote. Von Stutterbein, who was an official of the Reich Chancellery, comments on this procedure at page 34 of a pamphlet entitled "The Reich Chancellery," which I now offer in evidence as document 2231 PS.
Stand what the importance of that last document is.
The last document, Your Honor, please, is in further evidence of the approval of laws or the passing of laws by the circulatory process.
Well, we've already got Dr. Lammer's affidavit. There's surely...
It might be construed strictly cumulative if that's what Your Honor has in mind.
Well, if it is cumulative, we don't really want to hear it.
Yes, sir. I'll ask then that it be stricken from the record. I'd really overlooked that it was cumulative. Miss White and Commander Kaplan tell me that the document 2231 is probably also corroborative of the same process, and I'll therefore not offer it. I've already stated that for a time the Cabinet consulted together through actual meetings. The Council of Ministers did likewise, but those members of the Cabinet who were not already members of the Council also attended the meetings of the Ministerial Council. And where they did not attend in person, they were usually represented by state secretaries of the ministries. We have here minutes of 6 meetings of the Council of Ministers of the 1st, 4th, 8th, and 19th of September, 1939. Also of the 16th of October and 15th of November, 1939. These original documents were found in the files of the Reich Chancellery. I offer them in evidence, document 2852 PS, U.S. Exhibit 395. It will only be necessary to point for our purposes to a few of the minutes. I call the attention of the tribunal to the meeting held on the 1st of September 1939, which was probably the first meeting since the council was created on the 30th of August 1939. And I read from that document showing who was present, beginning at the top of the English translation. Present were the permanent members of the Council of Ministers for the Reich defense, the chairman and General Field Marshal Goering, the deputy of the Führer, Hess. For some unknown reason, a line appears through the name Hess, and plenipotentiary for Reich administration, Dr. Frick, the plenipotentiary for economy, Funk, the Reich Minister and Chief of Reich Chancellery, Dr. Lammers, and the Chief of the High Command of the Armed Forces, Keitel, represented by Major General Thomas. These were the regular members of the Council. Also present was the Reich Minister for Food and Agriculture, Daré, and 7 state secretaries. These state secretaries were from the several ministries or other supreme Reich authorities, as, for example, to name a few, Kerner was the deputy of the defendant Goering in the 4-year plan. Stuckert was in the Ministry of Interior. Landfried, the Minister of Economics. Surup was in the Ministry of Labor. These later positions appear on the government chart, which is already in evidence. Another meeting of the council, I'll skip that one. And then there came the names of 9 state
Storey,
secretaries.
that last document showed only that certain members of the cabinet went to a cabinet meeting.
Yes.
Did it show any more than that?
I was just going on a little further and to show that an SS Gruppenführer was present also, and other people were present.
And what would that show?
In other words, that they called in these subordinate people as in the meeting of ministers.
And what would that show?
Well, it just shows that a permeation of the party and subordinate agencies so that they could use this Reich cabinet for any purpose they want to and pass laws in any way they wanted to. They call on these subordinate people in these subordinate positions to sit with them where they were passing cabinet measures. And this fight also calls my attention. It is a ministerial council for defense, too. A cabinet, supposed to be a ministerial rank cabinet meeting. And as I just started to show, they called in SS Gruppenführer Heydrich in this meeting.
Well, but there can be no doubt, can there, that there was a Reich cabinet?
No, sir.
And that the Reich cabinet made decrees by this circulatory method. There's no doubt about that.
That's right, sir.
Well, what do these documents add to that?
Showing who participated and how they went out into the party ranks to bring
yes.
others, but I'll omit the rest of the references to these other individuals.
But we've had ample evidence before, haven't we, as to who formed the Reich cabinet?
Yes, sir. Well, I'll skip the rest of the references to other people who participated, and for the record, pass over to page 23 for the record. Before leaving these minutes, and as indicative of the activities of the Reichsregierung, I would like to direct the attention of the tribunal to some of the decrees passed and the minutes discussed at these meetings. At the first meeting of 1 September 1939, 14 decrees were ratified by the council. Of this group, I call the attention of the tribunal to decree number 6, appearing on page 2 of the translation, and I quote. Have you got that?
I don't think you gave us the number, did you?
I beg your pardon. What is that on page 23? No, but what is the... It's Reichsgesetzblatt number 1, page 1681, of which we ask the tribunal to take judicial notice. The decree was about the organization of the administration and about the German safety police in the protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. That appears in the translation of 2852. Another one that was passed was dated the 19th of September, 1938, on page 6 of the translation. And I quote from the bottom of the page of number 6. The chairman of the council, General Field Marshal Goering, made comments regarding the structure of civil administration in the occupied Polish territory. He expressed his intentions regarding the economic evacuation measures in this territory. Then the questions of decreasing wages and the questions of working hours and the support of members of families of inducted workers were discussed. Unquote. There are a number of miscellaneous points of discussion appearing, and in paragraph 2 of the minutes, where is that? I quote the following. It appears on page number 6. The chairman of the council, that's wrong. It's on page 7. The chairman directed that all members of the council regularly receive the situation reports of the Reichsfuhrer SS. Then the question of the population of the future Polish protectorate was discussed, and the placement of Jews living in Germany, unquote. Finally, I call the attention of the tribunal to the minutes of the meeting of 15 November 1939, page 10 of the translation, where, among other things, the treatment of Polish prisoners of war was also discussed. It's just before the close. The treatment of Polish prisoners of war was also discussed. We submit that this document not only establishes a close working union between agencies of the state and party, especially with the notorious SS, but also tends to establish, as charged in the indictment, that the Reichsregierung was responsible for the policies adopted and put into effect by the government, including those which comprehended and involved the commission of crimes referred to in the indictment. But a mere working alliance would be meaningless unless there was power, and the Reichsregierung had the power. Short of Hitler himself, it had practically all the power a government can exercise. The prosecution has already offered evidence on how Hitler's cabinet and the other Nazi conspirators secured the passage by the Reichstag of the law for the protection of the people and the Reich of 24 March 1933, which has been previously referred to in document 2001 PS, which law vested the cabinet with legislative powers even to the extent of deviating from previously existing constitutional law. How such powers were retained even after the members of the cabinet were changed, and how the several states, provinces, and municipalities which had formerly exercised semi-autonomous powers were transferred into the administrative organs of the central government. The ordinary cabinet emerged all-powerful from this rapid succession of events. The words of the defendant Frick are eloquent upon that achievement. Here is an article in document 2380, which I offer in evidence, and it's from the 1935 National Socialist Yearbook. I quote from page 213 of the original, and it's on page 1 of the English translation. The second paragraph. The relationship between the Reich and the states has been put on an entirely new basis, never known in the history of the German people. It gives to the Reich cabinet unlimited power. It makes even it its duty to build a completely unified leadership and administration of the Reich. From now on, there is only one national authority, the one of the Reich. Thus, the German Reich has become a unified state, and the entire administration in the states is only carried out by order or in the name of the Reich. The state borders are now only administration. Technical are boundaries, but no longer boundaries of sovereignty. In calm determination, the Reich cabinet realizes step by step, supported by the confidence of the entire German people, the great longing of the nation, the creation of the National Socialist German Unified State.
Colonel Storey.
Yes, sir.
That document seems to me to be merely cumulative. You've established, and other counsel on behalf of the United States have established, that the Reich ministers had power to make laws. And the question is whether you've given any evidence as to the criminal nature of the Reich cabinet.
Your Honor, please, again, it was included for the purpose of connecting the one of the defendants here.
Well, what I was finding out was that it was merely cumulative.
Yes.
And that
All right, sir. It may be strictly cumulative. I believe the next one would... I'll omit the next reference, which would probably also be cumulative, and turn over to the beginning, the word however in the text.
The same document, you mean?
No, sir. There's another document that I was going to offer. Number 2849 is a quotation from another book that probably bears on the same point. I'll omit it also. The next is a reference to the Ministerial Council being given legislative powers. I don't believe that that has been introduced before, that the council itself was given legislative powers. That is in Article 2 of a decree of the 30th of August, 1939, document 2018 PS. The ordinary cabinet continued to legislate throughout the war. Obviously, because of the fusion of the personnel between the Ministerial Council and the ordinary cabinet, questions were bound to arise as to what forum should lend its name to a particular law. Thus, Dr. Lammers, the chief of the Reich Chancellery and a member of both agencies, wrote a letter on the 14th of June, 1942, to the plenipotentiary for Reich administration about the questions. I'm just looking, Your Honor, to see if that might be...
Don't go too fast. They've got their light up.
This next document, if Your Honor please, maybe is not necessary to read. It just showed that both agencies continued to legislate side by side, and it would really be cumulative evidence. There were others that possessed legislative powers besides the ones I've mentioned. Hitler, of course, had legislative powers. Goering, as deputy of the 4-year plan, could and did issue decrees that had the effect of law. And the cabinet delegated power to issue laws which could deviate from the existing law to the plenipotentiaries of economy and administration and chief of the OKV, the so-called three-man college. The three-man college having authority to legislate. This was done in the war planning law, the secret defense law of 1938, document 2194, U.S. Exhibit 36. These three officials, Frank, Frick, Funk, and Keitel, however, were, as we have proved, also members of the Council of Ministers as well as being part of the ordinary cabinet. It can therefore be readily said in the language of the indictment that the Reichsregierung possessed legislative powers of a very high order in the system of German government, and that they exercised such powers has in part already been demonstrated. I simply refer to that as showing that it was the secret cabinet law, document 2194, without quoting. The executive and administrative powers of the Reich were concentrated in the central government primarily as a result of two basic Nazi laws that reduced the separate states called Länder to mere geographical divisions. Your Honor, please, these laws are cited, and I believe it would be cumulative evidence if we undertook to chronicle the laws. I'll pass to the part at the bottom of page 29. There were other steps taken towards centralization. Let us see what powers the ordinary cabinet would wield as a result. We have here a publication published in 1944, which was edited by Dr. Wilhelm Stuckart, State Secretary in the Reich Ministry of the Interior, and Dr. Harry V. Rosen von Hohl, another official with the title of Oberregierungsrat in the Reich Ministry of the Interior. It is entitled Administration Law, and I offer it as Exhibit 2959 PS. It details the powers and functions of all ministries of the ordinary cabinet, from which I will select but a few to illustrate the extent of the control vested in the Reichsregierung. The quotation is from page 2 of the translation and page 66 of the original. The Reich ministers. There are at present 21 Reich ministers, namely. And may I say the only purpose in offering this is to show what each minister had jurisdiction over and to what his authority extended. For example, the Reich Minister for Foreign Affairs, it details what he handles. The Reich Minister of the Interior follows a detail of the matters entrusted to his jurisdiction, and so on.
Well, Colonel Storey, may I ask you, what has that to do with the criminality of the Reich cabinet?
The point, as I see it again, it may be cumulative, Your Honor, is to show that how these defendants and the others with them formed the cabinet, formed the ministries, and formed these councils so that they could give semblance of legality to any act they determined to take, whether they were in session or not, and according to the dictates of the respective ministries. In other words, showing a complete domination.
I should have thought that was amply shown already.
All right, so I'll pass further reference. Yes. I'll skip over all the rest of the laws and go to page 35 for the record with reference to the criminality and the particular crimes. We now come to the second phase of the proof against the Reichsregierung, tending to establish the criminal characteristics. As the proof of all phases of the prosecution case is received, the tribunal will note more and more the relationship such evidence bears to the Reichsregierung and their resultant responsibility therefore. Here we will direct the court's attention to some prominent elements of the evidence that brands the group. First, it cannot be stressed too frequently that under the Nazi regime, the Reichsregierung became a criminal instrument of the Nazi Party. In the original cabinet of 13 January 1933, there were only 3 cabinet members who were members of the party, to wit, Goering, Frick, and Hitler. I have already shown, as new ministries were added, prominent Nazis were placed at their head. On the 30th of January 1937, Hitler executed acceptance into the party of those cabinet members who were not already members of the Nazi Party. This action is reported in Volksche Beobachter, South German edition, 1 February 1937, and its document 2964 PS, books it. And I quote from paragraph 3 and 4, 2964 of the English translation. Quoting, In view of the anticipated lifting of the ban for party membership, the Fuhrer, as the first step in this regard, personally carried out the enlistment into the party of the members of the cabinet, who so far had not belonged to it, and he handed them simultaneously the gold party badge, the supreme badge of honor of the party. In addition, the Fuhrer awarded the gold party badge to General Oberst von Fritsch, General Admiral Raeder, the Prussian Minister of Finance, Professor Puppets, and the Secretary of State and Chief of the Presidential Chancellery, Dr. Meissner. The Fuhrer also honored with the gold party badge the party members, State Secretary Dr. Lammers, State Secretary Funk, State Secretary Kerner, and State Secretary General of the Air Force Milch, unquote. It was possible to refuse the party membership thus conferred. You found it, sir. It was thus possible to refuse the party membership conferred. Only one man did this, however, von Rubinock, who was Minister of Posts and Minister of Transport at the time. I have here an original letter dated the 30th of January, 1937, from von Rubinock to Hitler, and it's in his own personal handwriting. And I offer it in evidence as document 1534 PS. It appears, and I desire to U.S. Exhibit 402. And I quote the entire document, number 1534. Berlin, W8, 30 January 37, Wilhelm Street, 79. My Fuhrer, I thank you for the confidence you have placed into me during the 4 years of your leadership and for the honor you do me in offering to admit me to the party. My conscience forbids me, however, to accept this offer. I believe in the principles of positive Christianity and must remain faithful to my Lord and to myself. Party membership, however, would mean that I should have to face without contradiction the steadily aggravating attacks by party offices on the Christian confessions and those who want to remain faithful to their religious convictions. This decision has been infinitely difficult for me, for never in my life have I performed my duty with greater joy and satisfaction than under your wise state leadership. I ask to be permitted to resign. With German greetings, yours very obediently, Baron von Eltz. But the Nazis didn't wait until all members of the cabinet...
Baron von Eltz permitted to resign?
Yes. But the Nazis didn't wait. As I understand, Your Honor, every one of them was a member except this one, and he declined and resigned, which was accepted. The Nazis didn't wait until all members of the cabinet were party members. Shortly after it came to power, it quickly assured itself of active participation in the work of the cabinet. On 1 December 1933, the cabinet passed a law securing the unity of the party and state. That's been introduced previously, and I'll not refer to it anymore. It's referred to here as our document 1395.
Why is Baron von Eltz shown in 1938 as a member of the cabinet?
Was he shown up there? No, it's
38.
Your Honor, please, the 1938 simply refers to the time the Secret Cabinet Council was created. It does not have to do when any of these people came to the cabinet.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I see.
In other words, all those arrows show that these different agencies
I follow. Yes, I follow.
were created during those years. I'll say for Your Honor's information that in this list of all of the cabinet members and the members of the Reich Regierung from 1933, his name is shown in the list that we handed to Your Honors.
Up to 1937.
No, sir. From 1933 clear through 1945, his name is listed. Your Honors will recall we handed a separate list,
Yes.
and it does contain the Baron's name and with the authority of his appointment, etc.
Oh, you mean that's a mistake?
No, sir, it's not a mistake.
He wasn't committed to resign then.
Well, then he didn't resign.
He did resign, but Your Honor asked if his name was shown up here, and I said that in the separate list, showing the list of all members of the Reich Regierung from 1933 to 1945, the Baron's name was included, and the proper reference is made in this separate list for Your Honor's guidance.
It's the complete list, but he did resign in 37.
Yes.
I have here a copy of an unpublished decree signed by Hitler and dated the 27th of July, 1934. It is document D-138, U.S. Exhibit 403. And it's in this section of laws and decrees, if Your Honor please. And I offer it in evidence, and this is a decree of Adolf Hitler. I decree that the deputy of the Führer, Reich Minister Hess, will have the capacity of a participating Reich Minister in connection with the preparation of drafts for laws in all Reich administrative spheres. All legislative work is to be sent to him when it is received by the other Reich Minister concerned. This also applies in cases where no one else participates except the Reich Minister making the draft. Reich Minister Hess will be given the opportunity to comment on drafts suggested by experts. This order will apply in the same sense to legislative ordinances. The deputy of the Führer, in his capacity of Reich Minister, can send as representative an expert on his staff. These experts are entitled to make statements to the Reich Ministers on his behalf, signed by Hitler. The defendant Hess himself has some pertinent comment to make regarding his right of participation on behalf of the party. And I now offer in evidence document D-139. This is an original letter signed by Rudolf Hess, and it's dated the 9th of October, 1934, and on the stationery of the National Socialist Party. And it's addressed to the Reich Minister for Enlightenment of the People and Propaganda, and signed by Hess. I now quote the entire document. By a decree of the Führer, dated 27 July 1934, I have been granted the right to participate in the legislation of the Reich as regards both formal laws and legal ordinances. This right must not be rendered illusory by the fact that I am sent the drafts of laws and decrees so late, and am then given a limited time, so that it becomes impossible for me to deal with the material concerned during the given time. I must point out that my participation means the taking into account of the opinion of the National Socialist Party as such, and that in the case of the majority of drafts of laws and decrees, consult with the appropriate departments of the party before making my comment. Only by proceeding in this manner can I do justice to the wish of the Führer as expressed in the decree of the Führer of 27 July 1934. I must therefore ask the Reich ministers to arrange that drafts of laws and decrees reach me in sufficient time. Failing this, I would be obliged in the future to refuse my agreement to such drafts from the beginning and without giving the matter detailed attention, and in all cases where I am not given a sufficiently long period for dealing with them. Heil, signed Rudolf Hess. A handwritten note appears attached to the letter. It reads, and I quote from page 2 of the translation, 17 October 19, is that 35 or 40? 35. 1. The identical letter seems to have been addressed to all Reich ministers. In our special field, the decree of 27 July 1934 has hardly become applicable so far. A reply does not seem called for. 2. File in File 7B, signed R. The participating powers of Hess were later broadened. I now refer to document D-140, 140, U.S. Exhibit 405, and it's a letter dated the 12th of April, 1938, from Dr. Lammers to the Reich ministers. And I offered in evidence and quote from the English translation, being paragraph 3. The deputy of the Führer will also have participation where the Reich ministers give their agreement to the state laws and legislative ordinances of states under paragraph 3 of the first decree concerning reconstruction of the Reich of February 2nd, 1934. Where the Reich ministers have already at an earlier date been engaged in the preparation of such laws or legislative ordinances, or have participated in such preparation, the deputy of the Führer likewise becomes participating Reich minister. Laws and legislative decrees of the Austrian state are equally affected hereby.
Colonel Storey,
Yes.
May I ask you what those 3 documents are supposed to prove?
In the first place, Your Honor, the one I've just referred to shows that the passed laws over conquered territory, that one related to Austria. The one signed by Hess just before gives him almost unlimited power as regards to both formal and legal ordinances and over administrative districts. And in addition, I think, Your Honor, the most important point is that Hess says that you must send them to me long enough in advance so that I may consult with the party and the appropriate party members and get their reaction.
Is that relied upon as evidence of criminality, that he took the trouble to find out what other ministers thought?
I think it's a part of the general conspiracy showing the domination of party and state by the Nazi party and particularly the leadership corps.
Well, I thought I had already said that it appeared to us, I think I speak on behalf of all the tribunal, that that matter had been amply proved. and that we wish you to turn to the question of criminality of the Reich cabinet.
Well, may I assume, sir, your honors, then, that we need to offer no further proof that the party itself had to do with the making of these laws as suggested by the defendant Hess. I thought it was incumbent upon us to prove that the party dominated this cabinet, and particularly the leadership corps.
Well, you're dealing now with the Reich cabinet.
Yes, sir.
And I think the tribunal is satisfied that the Reich cabinet had full powers to make laws.
I think that we go a little step further and undertake to show, if we have not already shown, that the way and manner in which they did it by consulting the party was criminal. Now, I have some other laws to cite here in corroboration of that, but if the tribunal is satisfied, I don't see any use to cite them.
Well, I don't think the tribunal would imagine that they made laws without consulting somebody. But perhaps it would be a convenient time to break off for 10 minutes.
Your honors, please. When we adjourned, we were speaking of these laws that had been passed. And certainly, I do not want to offer any cumulative evidence or any that is not necessary. May I therefore briefly state the purpose of referring to the laws which we propose to offer now. The party, as your honors will recall, had 25 fundamental points which they had set out to achieve as introduced in evidence yesterday. Those points, your honor will recall, related to everything from the abrogation of the Treaty of Versailles and Saint-Germain to the obtaining of greater living space, so forth. Now, we propose to cite to your honors various decrees and laws passed by this cabinet, carrying into effect what we contend were the criminal purposes of the party, and that therefore the Reich cabinet was asked by the party to give semblance of legality to their alleged criminal purposes. And that is the only reason we expect to chronicle or to mention the laws that were passed in pursuance thereof. And I shall proceed as your honor suggests. I simply list a group of the laws that seek to establish the so-called 25 points next of the Nazi Party. And perhaps with your honor's permission, I'll just refer to a few of them as being indicative of the type of laws that were passed to further their 25 points. For example, in implementation, the Nazi cabinet enacted, among others, the following laws. The law of February 3rd, 1938, concerning the obligation of German citizens in foreign countries to register. That's cited in the Reichsgesetzblatt. The law of the 13th of March, 1938, relating to the reunion of Austria with Germany.
Don't go too fast. What was that?
The law of March 13, 1938,
Yes.
for the reunion of Austria with Germany.
These were all passed by the Reich cabinet,
Yes,
were they?
sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. Now, aren't you going to cite these
Yes,
laws?
sir, but I was going to use them as illustrative, and that is the 1938 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 237. The law of November 21, 1938, for the reintegration of the German Sudetenland with Germany. 1938 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 1641. The incorporation of memo land into Germany. March 23rd, 1939. Part 1, page 559 of the 1939 Reichsgesetzblatt. With reference to point 2 of the party platform.
Would you give me the place where the 25 points are set out? Have you got a reference to that?
I cited it, yes, sir. It appears in document 1708 PS in document book A.
Thank you.
And I believe we referred to it yesterday.
That's sufficient.
Yes. Now, as an illustration, point 2 of that party platform, which, as your honors will recall, they demanded the cancellation of the treaties of Versailles and Saint-Germain. The following acts of the Cabinet in support of this part of the program may be mentioned. Proclamation of October 14, 1933, to the German people concerning Germany's withdrawal from the League of Nations and the disarmament conference. 1933, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 730. Law of March 16, 1935, for the establishment of the Wehrmacht and compulsory military service. 1935, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, pages 369 to 375. Now, with reference to Part 4, or Point 4 of the party, which said, quote, only those who are members of the Volk can be citizens. Only those who are of German blood, without regard to religion, can be members of the Volk. No Jew, therefore, can be a member of the Volk, unquote. That's point 4. Among other cabinet laws, this point was implemented by the law of July 14, 1933, for the recall of naturalization and deprivation of citizenship of these people. 1933, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 480. The law of April 7, 1933, which said that persons of non-Aryan descent could not practice law. 1933, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 188. The law of April 25, 1933, restricting the number of non-Aryans in schools and higher institutions of learning. 1933, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 225. The law of September 29, 1933, excluding persons of the Jewish blood from the peasantry.
From what?
From the peasantry. 1933, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 685. Another one, March 19, 1937, excluded Jews from the Reich labor service. 1937, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 325. Here's another one of July 6, 1938, prohibited Jews from participating in 6 different types of businesses. 1938, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 823. point 23 of that platform proclaimed, quote, "We demand legislative action against conscious political lies and their broadcasting through the press," unquote. To carry out this point, I give a few of the cabinet laws that were passed. One of September 22, 1933, which established the Reich Culture Chamber. 1933 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 661. One concerning editors of October 4, 1933. 1933 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 713. Another one with reference to restrictions as to the use of the theater on May 15, 1934.
The use of the what?
Theater.
Oh, yes.
Shows. 1934 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 411.
What was the date of that?
May 15, 1934.
Yes.
Now, passing from those illustrative laws, the ordinary cabinet, in fact, enacted most of the legislation which set the stage for and put into execution the Nazi conspiracy described under Count 1 of the indictment. Many of these laws have been referred to previously by the prosecution. All of the laws I shall refer to and to which I have referred were enacted specifically in the name of the cabinet. A typical introductory paragraph reads, and I quote, "The Reich Cabinet has enacted the following law, which is hereby promulgated." In other words, that shows it's a cabinet law.
That applies to all the ones you've just given us.
Yes, sir, that's a typical heading. In connection with the acquiring of control of Germany under Count 1 of the indictment, I refer to some of the following laws. Here's the law of the 14th of July, 1933, against the establishment of new parties. I believe I referred to that yesterday. That's 1933, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 479. Another of 14 July, 1933, provided for the confiscation of property of Social Democrats and others. 1933, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 479. And I've already referred to that law of 1 December 1933, which consolidated the party and state, which is found in 1933 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 1016. In the course of consolidating the control of Germany, these laws were enacted, and I give a few illustrations. 21 March 1933, creating special courts. That's in 1933 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 316. 136, I beg your pardon. Law of the 31st of March 1933 for the integration of all of the states into the Reich. 1933, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 153.
Will you repeat that? Integration of what?
Into the integration of the states. That's the separate states into the Greater Reich. Here's one of 30 June 1933, eliminating non-Aryan civil servants or civil servants married to non-Aryans. 1933, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 433. The law of the 24th of April, 1934, creating the People's Court. 1934, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 341. And that was the same court Your Honor saw functioning in one of the movies exhibited last week. The law of 1 August 1934, uniting the office of President and Chancellor. 1934, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 747. I'm not introducing all of them or referring to all of them. Here's a law of 18 March 1938 that provides for the submission of one list of candidates to the electorate of the entire Reich. 1938, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 258. Nazi extermination of political internal resistance in Germany through the purge of their political opponents and through acts of terror, which are set forth in paragraph 3D, 3 sub B of count 1, was facilitated or legalized by the following cabinet laws, translations being found in document book F, which has previously been submitted. I'll just refer to a few of these as they are translated in that book. Here's one of 14 July 1933. Prohibits the establishment of new parties and contains a penal clause. That's found in 1933, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 479. Here's one of 20 December, 1933.
You've already given us that one.
Beg your pardon?
You had already given us that one.
I believe it was, yes, sir. Yes. Here's the law of the 3rd of July, 1934, concerning measures for emergency defense of the state and which legalized the Rome Purge. That's in 1934, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 529. Law of 20 December 1934 on treacherous acts against the state and party and for protection of the party uniforms. 1934, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 1269. Here is one of the 24th of April, 1934, that makes the creation of a new or continuance of existing political parties an act of treason. 1934, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 341. Here's one of 28 June, 1935, that changes the penal code. 1935, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 839. Now here is the final one I'll mention. The 16th of September, 1939, permitting second prosecution of an acquitted person before a special court, the members of which were named by Hitler. 1939, Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 1841. Now the next are some laws that related to the extermination of the trade unions, which I've already cited, and they're in document book G. I'll not refer to them. And then the laws abolishing collective bargaining, I've referred to those. I'll pass them. In fact, even the infamous Nuremberg laws of September 15, 1935, although technically passed by the Reichstag, were nevertheless worked out by the Ministry of the Interior. This is verified by the work of Dr. Frank A. Medicus, entitled Ministerial Dirigent, published in 1940. It's document 2960 PS, U.S. Exhibit 406. And I'd like to refer to the paragraphs at page 62 of the original publication and translated in our document 2960 PS. 2960 PS, beginning the first paragraph. The work of the Reich Ministry of Interior forms the basis for the 3 Nuremberg laws passed by resolution of the Reichstag on the occasion of the Reich Party meeting of freedom. The Reich citizenship law, as well as the law for the protection of German blood and German honor, opened extensive tasks for the Ministry of the Interior, not only in the field of administration. The same applies to the Reich flag law that gives the foundation for the complete reorganization of the use of the flag. A few decrees of the Council of Ministers, which similarly supplied the legal basis for the criminal acts and conduct of the conspirators, about which the tribunal has already heard and will hear more, relate to those of August 5th, 1940, which imposed a discriminatory tax on Polish workers in Germany, and that is in 1940 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 1077. And also the law of 4 December 1941, which imposed penal measures against the Jews and the Poles in Eastern occupied countries. 1941 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 759. The last one was concerning the employment of Eastern workers, which I referred to this morning. Almost immediately upon Hitler's coming into power, the cabinet commenced to implement the Nazi conspiracy to wage aggressive war. 3 of the documents that establish this point have already been introduced in evidence, and they are EC 177, 2261 PS, and 2194 PS, respectively. Document EC 177, which is U.S. Exhibit 390, is a long copy of the minutes, and I beg the indulgence of the tribunal for referring to it again. It's EC 177.
Is it in this book?
Yes, sir. EC 177. Right about the middle, Your Honor, please. EC 177.
Is it after the D's?
Sir?
Is it after the D's or before the D's?
Before the D's.
Oh, yes,
Before
I've got
the
it.
laws and decrees.
Yes, I've got it.
Your Honor, I didn't intend to quote from that, simply referring to it as being the minutes of the second session of the Working Committee of the Delegates for the Reich Defense. and being signed by defendant Keitel. In document 2261, consists of a letter dated 24th of June 35, 2261, that contains or transmits a copy of a secret, unpublished defense law of 21 May 1935, and also a copy of a decision of the Reich Cabinet of the same date in the Council for the Defense of the Reich. These have been previously introduced, but they're illustrative laws passed by this Cabinet. Document 2194 also transmits a copy of a secret, unpublished Reich defense law of 4 September 1938. I'll skip down to the laws passed by the Reich Defense Council on page 50 for the record. The Reich Defense Council was a creation of the Cabinet. On 4th April 1932, it decided to form that agency. The decision of the Cabinet, attached to document 2261 PS, which is U.S. Exhibit 24, page 4 of the translation, paragraph 1, proves that fact. The two secret laws contained in document 2261 as well as 2194 were passed by the Cabinet. Now, was this a case of one group setting up an entirely distinct group to do its dirty work? The Cabinet put itself into the picture. This might have been a difficult task to accomplish before the Nazis assumed power, but with the Nazis in control, things could move swiftly. And I now refer again to document EC 177, but I'll not undertake to quote from that, although the quotation is set out here. There's only one point in that connection that would not be cumulative, is page 5 of the translation and page 8 of that original of EC 177. On the question of security and secrecy that I think would be pertinent to the criminal nature. I quote, "Question has been brought up by the Reich ministers. The secrecy of all Reich defense work has to be maintained very carefully. Communications with the outside by messenger service only has been settled already with the Post Office, Finance Ministry, Prussian Ministry of Interior, and Reichswehr Ministry. Main principle of security, no document must be lost, since otherwise enemy propaganda would make use of it. Matters communicated orally cannot be proven. They can be denied by us in Geneva. Therefore, the Reichswehr Ministry has worked out security directives for the Reich ministries and the Prussian Ministry of the Interior." I'll skip the next reference. I believe I'll skip over to the affidavit of Dr. Frick on page 60 for the affidavit of Dr. Wilhelm Frick.
Where is that?
It's document, Your Honor, please, 2986. Document 2986 PS, and it's document U.S. Exhibit 409. It's the original affidavit signed by the defendant Frick. I believe Dr. Frick sums up pretty well how the work was carried on. I, Wilhelm Frick, being first duly sworn, depose and say, I was plenipotentiary for the Reich administration from the time when this office was created until the 20th of August, 1943. Heinrich Himmler was my deputy in this capacity. Before the outbreak of the war, my task as plenipotentiary for Reich administration was the preparation of organization in the event of war, such as, for instance, the appointment of liaison men in the different ministries who would keep in touch with me. As plenipotentiary for Reich administration, I, together with the plenipotentiary for economy and the OKW, formed what was called a three-man college. We were also members of the Reich Defense Council, which was supposed to plan preparations and decrees in case of war, which later on were published by the Ministerial Council for the Defense of the Reich. Since as soon as the war started, everything had to be done speedily, and there would have been no time for planning, such measures and decrees were prepared in advance in case of war. All one then still had to do was to pull out of the drawer the war orders that had been prepared. Later on, after the outbreak of the war, these decrees were enacted by the Ministerial Council for the Defense of the Reich, signed and sworn to by Dr. Wilhelm Frick on the 19th of November, 1945. To sum up this particular phase of the proof, the Cabinet, by its own decision and its own laws, created a large war planning body, the Reich Defense Council, the members of which were taken from the Cabinet. Within the Council, they, a small working committee, again composed of Cabinet members and certain defense officials, the majority of whom were appointed for the Cabinet members. And to streamline the action, they placed all of its ministries, except Air, Propaganda, and Foreign Affairs, into the groups headed respectively by the plenipotentiaries for Economy and Administration and the OKW. And everything was organized in and for the greatest of secrecy. That's this three-man college. Now, in conclusion, Your Honor, please, I would like at this time to summarize briefly the proof concerning the Reichsregierung. From 1933 to the end of the war, the Reichsregierung comprised the dominant body of influence and leadership below Hitler in the Nazi government. The three subdivisions were included in the term Reichsregierung in the indictment: the Ordinary Cabinet, the Secret Cabinet Council, and the Council of Ministers for the Defense of the Reich. Yet in reality there existed only an artificial, illusory boundary between the three. The predominant subdivision was, of course, the Ordinary Cabinet, which was commonly referred to as the Reichsregierung. In it were the leading political and military figures in the Nazi government. 17 of the 22 defendants before this tribunal were integral parts of the Ordinary Cabinet. I should like now to name these defendants and to indicate the positions they held in the Reichsregierung. Martin Bormann, leader of the party chancellery. Karl Dönitz, commander-in-chief of the Navy. Hans Frank, Reich Minister without portfolio. Wilhelm Frick, Minister of the Interior, Plenipotentiary for Reich Administration, Reich Minister without portfolio. Walter Funk, Minister of Economics, Plenipotentiary for Economy. Hermann Goering, Minister of Air, Reich Forest Master. Rudolf Hess, Deputy of the Fuhrer. Wilhelm Keitel, Chief of the OKW. Konstantin U.K. von Neurath, Minister of Foreign Affairs, President of the Secret Cabinet Council. Franz von Papen, Vice Chancellor. Erich Raeder, Commander-in-Chief of the Navy. Joachim von Ribbentrop, Minister of Foreign Affairs. Rosenberg, Minister of the Occupied Eastern Territories. Hjalmar Schacht, Acting Minister of Economics, Reich Minister without portfolio, President of the Reichsbank, Plenipotentiary for War Economy. Baldur von Schirach, Reich Youth Leader. Seyss-Inquart, Reich Minister without portfolio. And finally, Albert Speer, Minister for Armaments and War Production. From the ordinary cabinet there came not only the members of the Secret Cabinet Council and the Council of Ministers for the Defense of the Reich, but also the members of the War Planning Group, the Nazi Secret Reich Defense Council. When it was deemed essential for the purposes of the conspiracy to wage aggressive war, that power was concentrated in a few individuals. Again, these individuals were drawn from the ordinary cabinet. Thus, the plenipotentiary for economy and administration were also ministers of the ordinary cabinet, and they were also members of the Reich Defense Council and the Ministerial Council. Under them were grouped practically all the ministers of the ordinary cabinet. Where political considerations of foreign policy required that another select group be chosen to act as advisors, the secret cabinet was created and populated with members of the ordinary cabinet. The Reichsregierung was dominated by the Nazi Party through the control exercised over its legislation by the deputy of the Fuhrer Hess and later by the leader of the party chancellery Bormann. Party control was also effected through the individual membership of all members and the union of various key cabinet and party positions in one man. As a result of this fusion of the party and state, an enormous concentration of political power was gathered into the cabinet. The laws enacted by the cabinet established the framework within which the Nazi conspirators established their control of Germany, as set forth in count 1 of the indictment, and by virtue of which they were enabled to commit the crimes alleged in counts 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the indictment. The cabinet enacted harsh penal laws, discriminatory laws, confiscatory laws, in violations of the principles of justice and humanity. Decrees enacted by the Ministerial Council during the war clothed the criminal acts of the Nazi conspirators with a semblance of legality. As an instrument of the party, the cabinet effectively implemented the notorious points of the party program. Finally, the cabinet, almost immediately upon coming into power of Hitler, became a war planning group through its establishment in 1933 of a Reich Defense Council and its active participation in the schemes and plans for waging aggressive war. It is therefore most respectfully submitted that by virtue of all of the foregoing, the Reichsregierung, as defined in Appendix B, page 35 of the indictment, should be declared a criminal group within the meaning of Article 9, Section 2 of the Charter. That concludes, if Your Honor please, this presentation